And there we go. In a vast wasteland of entertainment where radio has become obsolete, stands an embittered man teetering at the edge of sanity. With help from radio friends, he's about to embark on a global mission that would change the course of history as we know it. Broadcasting live from the secret studios on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware is Mitchell K.C. Hill. And up to the Great White North in Vancouver is Alexander Knight. And here we are with show number 45. Can you believe that? My name is Mitchell K.C. Hill. I'm the old guy that used to be in the radio business. And the younger guy, the guy that you always want to hear about for tech stuff and what current millennials are listening to, must be an expert on Taylor Swift. My good friend and producer, Alexander Knight, and he's already making a face at me.
It's good to be here, Mitch. Thanks for that introduction. No, I'm not an expert or a fan of Taylor Swift, but more power to you if you like her music. She's obviously a talented and successful musician. This is The Last Angry DJ, the show that bridges the gap between new media and old media. This is a show where we interview everyone from DJs to engineers to independent radio station owners and everyone in between. Thanks to everyone for joining us live on the show today. I'm really excited about today's guests. Just want to also acknowledge the people at Boink Software who make Memo Live. That's the application that runs this entire show. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you very much. And of course, to everybody in the back-end crew, Mark Giuliani and Laura Thompson, we appreciate your help.
Yeah, we encourage you to add your questions and comments to what's going on live here. And as Alex told you, we do this live on Sundays so that you can ask those questions live. And then when we turn it into an audio podcast later on, you know, obviously it's not an interactive medium at that time. So we got the best of both worlds. We got the video and we got the audio, and we're having fun. But here's where the fun begins. We get to have a guest on right now who remembers what I used to be on the radio, and also is currently involved in it today. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Sean Ross, of Ross on Radio, who has his own newsletter and also is an expert on what's happening on the radio musically and other things. Sean, why don't you expand a little bit on what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis, particularly when you do your newsletter?
Yeah, like anybody lucky enough to have one job in radio these days. I have three. I am a longtime trade journalist. I worked for Billboard. You were talking to Joel Denver a few weeks ago. I worked 2 offices down from Joel at Radio and Records, the trade Bible of the music industry in the 70s and 80s. I worked for a company called Edison Research, doing research projects for radio stations. I do consulting individually for radio stations, and I still write about the radio business every week. I write a column called Ross on Radio. It's a newsletter that comes out every Thursday. It goes out to all aspects of the radio industry, from group owners to program directors to chief engineers to anybody who really ever had an interest in radio programming.
Can you give us a sneak peek into what's coming out in the next Thursday's Ross on Radio?
Coming out next Thursday is a column called Intriguing Radio Stations of 2024. And it's interesting because we think there's nothing interesting happening now. But every year I start putting this list together, which I'm planning to start doing tonight after the show, because I have to go back through 51 columns to see who I wrote about and see who's still worth writing about again. But there's always more radio than I can listen to, thanks to streaming. In my car, I have TuneIn, I have iHeart, I have an Australian radio app called Radio App. And they're basically my new push buttons. iHeart just redid their app so that you can have push buttons.
Oh, that's cool.
So, yeah,
Do,
and
let's
my car
explain to people
has
what push button radio was when we used to listen in the car. You had about 8 push buttons, lower end, 56, whatever, upper end, the local regional stations, and you just punched the button, and there it was. That was a cool thing about radio back then. So they're bringing that back. That's neat.
well, and it's smart because part of what radio has lost is the convenience. What radio has lost is how well everything is organized for you. And now you're driving. You don't have time to scroll between 37 icons.
Yeah, you're not going to be punching in a URL while you're, traveling down the superhighway with other
We
people.
hope not.
Yeah, we hope you're not doing that. Well, here's what my first impression of you. First of all, I've followed you on social media for quite a while, and you always ask intriguing questions about people's opinions about music playlists, music in general, and music in specifically. And I find it very interesting that guys our age are still experts on current music versus what was happening 50 years ago. You span quite a broad base of broadcasting. Where was the beginning of your radio fandom begin? Where did you start out listening that gave you some influence?
Family. My dad was the public affairs director for a group called Sonderling. Sonderling owned WOL in Washington. Possibly one of the greatest, definitely one of the greatest R&B stations of all time. As big in the 60s as WTGC in Washington
More.
was 20 years ago. As big as Power 99 and as influential. It was the WHAT or WDAS.
Right, you're
Of its
mentioning
era.
Philadelphia stations now, but I remember Harv Moore on PGC out of Morningside, and it was quite a station.
Yeah, my dad was public affairs director for an R&B station, and one of the things he did, he came on at 3 o'clock every afternoon and read the names of delinquent landlords to try and help people get repairs made.
Yikes.
So I was around WOL. I had access to promo records. I learned very quickly that, there were records I liked that never became hits and that only I knew.
And you know
I
what?
probably,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say that's a whole category of music. I mean, there was music that played back when I was making decisions for a radio station of what our top 40 hits were going to be, and I would break a record, and it would be a hit, and then I would never hear it again. Like "Don't Give Up on Me, Baby" by David Soul from Starsky and Hutch. Where did that song go? Why isn't it being played anymore? It was like a top 5 hit back in its time. Or Boone, what was her name? Debbie Boone. "You Light Up My Life." I got a gold record for that. It played, almost to number 1. Nobody wants to play that song ever again. So that's a whole different category, I think, of music that was hits at the time. Maybe there was other influences, things going on in the business. Who the
no,
heck
you light
knows?
up. Here's the thing. Record like "You Light Up My Life," you could not manufacture a hit like that. That song, before it came to Philly, broke out of Houston. It went to number 1 on both Houston stations in 5 weeks. It was beyond legit. It's easy to make fun of now. But it was exactly the kind of hit record that came from the people And it helped that it had the movie and the saturation advertising for the movie. And by the way, people, um, I like being able to talk this way about new records too, as opposed to doing the forensics on Debbie Boone from 48 years ago. But that was the exciting thing about the business, because in July 1977, a month before that record broke, you could have not said, Pat Boone's Daughter's got a potential hit record and it's going to go to #1 for 10 weeks, and you're going to love it at first, and then you're going to be sick of it, and then you're going to make fun of it forever. You could not have predicted that. And that was the excitement about the business.
And I remember getting the phone call from Freddie DeCipio, Freddie whispering in my ear, he said, this is a hit. And I said, really? I got to remember, I was a young green music director at a major radio station.
Roller, probably.
Yeah, I was a rock and roller. And I said, Freddie, really? He said, trust me on this. And when Freddie said, trust me on this, I trusted him because he was one of the guys that helped me get my job there at FIL. But you bring up a very good point.
In fall 77, the hits were Sometimes When We Touch. The hits were Falling by LeBlanc and Carr. The hits were, Just Remember I Love You by Firefall. Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue, Blue by You. You Light Up My Life hardly seemed any wimpier or any cornier than anything else on the radio.
And yet, top 40 back in those days, I remember our playlist would be, you would play Helen Reddy, and then you would back it with Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, and maybe Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and then Terry Jackson, Seasons in the Sun. It was all over the place. It was a crazy time for music.
FIL, because it was Philly. And because Philly was one of those cities where rock and R&B came together. Philly, when I was growing up listening to Joel Denver a couple of years ahead of you, Joel broke Changes by David Bowie. And then you would hear Mighty Love by the Spinners.
Right.
I have come to really appreciate WFIL over the years because the station took so many shots on music and was its own animal and was one of the best produced stations in the country.
And why do you suppose that is? How do you speculate on a radio station having a sound, even though they're playing the same music as the guys across town or across the country? How do you get that? How do you get that certain whatever it is, boss
Some
radio?
of that was Jay Cook. Some of it was the talent of the announcers. Some of it, was Joel, who, I now think, was one of our greatest music directors. Some of it was the board ops.
Yeah, I agree. And to explain what that means is that in most radio stations, as a disc jockey back in those days, we played 45s and cart machines, and we were very, very busy arranging them, the methodology and mechanics of what it took to make that sound. But FIL was a unique radio station in many markets because what they did is they had a separate room where an engineer, who was a union engineer, played all of the stuff. And it was very, very, very produced, a very meticulous way that they did everything, including when you came out of the news, they back-timed the song intro with the name of the newsman and the disc jockey, and it would when the jockey. It was just very, very particularly produced. Yeah,
WFIL music.
Alan Stone, WFIL News. Casey Hill, WFIL Music. And that Casey Hill part would be right underneath the intro to a song at the time. And when I stopped talking, that music was there. And when you introed music back in those days, you had to intro right up to the post or right up to the vocal. And that was a God-given rule that came down from Jay Cook. So, yeah, thanks for saying that because I had a chance to work there when Boss Radio was a thing, and WFIL was one that had a great, a lot of influence. One of the things FIL had, which was unique, and every time I hear this, I stand up and hold my hand over my heart. They had a great jingle package. They had lots of great jingle packages, but one of the best ones was called the Philly Story. And this is the jingle you heard at the top of the hour at WFIL. Philadelphia. Music would start. I mean, how much more impressive could that become? And that was done by Pam's many years ago. I guess John Wolfert has it now. Thanks, John, for letting us play that jingle. But that was the top of the hour music, and they had an entire jingle package of different things like Casey Hill, WFIL. Just an idea what jingles got played on that and no different than other major stations like WLS or WABC. Stations all over the country had that. That was all part of that meticulous branding and production that was done to make it sound so cool. And I think you hinted at me, Sean, that there was a liner that WFIL made famous for you. I think I know what it is, and I'm gonna do it for you. But do you have that liner in your mind? And I'm gonna reproduce it here for you.
I do. It's always
okay,
front and center.
All right, I think I know what it is. So I'm either gonna hit big with this or I'm gonna miss it. But I'm gonna reproduce Tiny Tom Tyler, the voiceover guy. WFIL Power Play. That's one of the big ones. Was that it?
That was good too.
I didn't get it.
But summer of '76.
Okay.
Bicentennial. WFIL, Philadelphia. Rocket and the Cradle of Liberty.
Now I remember that one. Yeah, that was it. And we ran they ran.
But they're all great.
They ran it was the Sound of Philadelphia package, and I'm not sure who did that for them. It might have been TM that did that, but they had that. They basically borrowed all the OJs, all the Gamble and Huff, all the licks and stuff from them, and placed them on the air. So anyhow, you can tell we have a love for a radio station that was back in the day of Boss Radio. I caught the tail end of it, just at the tail end of it, after Joel left, and I became the music director there for a while, and it was very neat. And if you were to do I think as you said, a forensic takedown of what made stations big back in the day, big talent, big sounds, big personalities. Alex, you've commented on this before that you're disappointed that you didn't have a radio station today that you could listen to that had that kind of talent, talent where people were over the top, could talk about everything they wanted, were very entertaining. What's going on? Do you notice that?
I very much do. It's interesting when first of all, I love jingles, and those are great jingles that you just played, Mitch. I don't recall ever hearing jingles like that on any of the radio stations that I listened to in the 90s. So I don't know if that's more of an American thing or maybe only certain talk radio stations. But on all the big stations like CFox here, which is a big successful radio station, still is, and Rock 101, they never really played a whole lot of that kind of old school. I just see that as from like a very different era. They never really played a lot of that stuff. They had great talent though, great DJs back in the 90s, and a lot of those guys are still working today, but a lot of them have disappeared, or they're just not at the same. Those stations don't really have the same kind of juice anymore that they did back in the 90s.
The great Vancouver jingle was LG 73, which hung in as top 40 for various reasons pertaining to Canada's radio as a top 40 station until the early 90s. The top 40 station that replaced them, Z95.3, I don't think had jingles. You wouldn't expect CFox to have jingles. It's, rock stations usually didn't. Rock stations were usually trying to prove how cool they were.
Yeah,
by
exactly.
being anti-jingle and and not talking over the intro and not hitting the post.
Yeah, they kind of fell out of favor for a while, and then liners came in where they had people talking instead of singing, and they came back in a big way. Z100 and their huge success in New York was probably one of the biggest jingle packages that I recall. I think Turbo Z was one of the packages. I'm speaking of jam stuff. That was hot. That was, I mean, today I would play any one of those jingles. Jingles were a
Yeah,
thing, and they were neat.
TM Studios just put a new package back on WLS in Chicago, which is now classic hits on FM, playing the songs that WLS made famous.
Do you think
Yeah,
you could play jingles from before, just as a reminder what it used to be? Because jingles are those little quick reminders of the slogans that stations had and what they did.
jingles help people say the call letters.
Yeah.
Um, it, I mean, there are many reasons that radio is not obsolete, but radio is obviously diminished, um, and not being able to market is part of that. Um, and kind of, sometimes being ashamed to be radio is part of that. Feeling that, the things we're talking about now, are, distant echoes. And, the thing is that nothing, not quite enough has come along to replace it. Streaming does not have the same purchase on people's affections. No, an 18-year-old doesn't have the radio under the pillow now, but they don't necessarily have Spotify under the pillow. If anything now has the same purchase on people's affections, it's probably TikTok.
Yeah, TikTok or Instagram. It's like just when I get catch up and I'm on Facebook, kids are telling me, Facebook? What do you got? You know, we're on Instagram now. Where are you? And I'm like, Instagram and TikTok. Come on. It's very hard to keep up with all these things. And I think that is part
Yeah.
of what I miss about radio is back when you and I, Sean, were worshiping our favorite radio stations in Washington and Chicago and Philadelphia. There was no social media. There was no internet. In fact, the weird thing was that the skip where the AM stations could be heard outside their region at night because of the technical ionosphere mumbo jumbo was the way we were able to be exposed to things that were outside of our area. Today, I don't even think that really works anymore because of the interference of AM, and nobody listens as much to AM as they listen to FM now. So things have changed. There's a lot more things vying for our attention. And this is probably a good time for me to give Mark Giuliani a chance to speak. Mark is a group owner in a smaller town in Delaware, big radio town. There's like, what, 40 radio stations vying for attention? And that, how do you compete against the big boys,
So
Mark, being in a small market?
it's the Salisbury market. It's market, I think 132 this time around. 42 stations, and lots of them are music, obviously, but we're getting to more and more news talk. We're a news talk station. Both our stations are news talk, and we spread them out so that we can cover as much as the 50,000 watters. We're Class A, 6,000 watts. But I hear all the time people say that radio is starting to feel the other social media apps or the other things that consume people's time. And what I find interesting about that is while the overall percentage of adults has dwindled a little bit, the number of adults has gone up. So if you start to look at the statistics year over year over year, you'll see a trend since the 90s of the numbers actually going up. And yet you hear all the time about, well, the percentage, used to be 92 and now it's 88 or 86. And you're like, yes, but the overall number of listeners is going up. I
Yeah,
think
Yeah,
what's,
haters
radio,
will hate, right?
yeah.
radio's in a trick bag. Um, Radio is still the biggest. If you look at Edison share of ear, radio still has a bigger percent of listening, at least 12 plus, maybe not with a 17-year-old. Radio is still a bigger piece than podcasting. Radio is still a bigger piece than streaming music. Radio, I say, is diminished but not demolished. Um, and I mean, the trick bag is that the people who operate radio, they can't do the radio. Just logistically, they can't do the radio that you and I grew up on. They are coming to understand the importance of personality again. Z100 now in New York has a 2-person afternoon show. Kiss 108 in Boston, I think, has a 3-person afternoon show. People are beginning to understand the importance of personality, but it's hard to do, when you're not making the money that you were budgeted to make 15 years ago.
And that's an interesting point you bring up because a friend of show, Andre Gardner, who
Yeah.
was the afternoon guy at WMGK in Philadelphia, Classic Rock, very well liked by his listeners, very passionate about his show, gave a lot of his personality, and had a renewal of his contract, and then shortly thereafter was let go by Beasley Broadcasting. You got to wonder what's going on that they would, release a very loved and respected individual. Is it all about money? Is it about the industry changing? I mean, do you have an insight into that, Sean?
Oh, yeah. The Eric Johnson, Andre's PD, still posts about how much he misses him. Which is not something you typically see. Sometimes management, tries to front and, tries to act like, this was their choice. MGK has made it very clear, I think, that, Andre was a victim of budget cuts. Andre, was not doing a high personality show, but everything he said differently. Everything he did colored in the lines and did exactly what you would want, a good personality to do.
So is it
I've
the age of big ownership? And there's like what 5 companies that own most of the radio stations. Is that an issue? Because I bring Mark in here a lot of times because he owns a small group and he's very, very hyper local, which is the words we hear all the time. Be hyper local in terms of how you present. The big guys can't do that quite so well because they're just a big ship moving at sea. How do you feel about hyperlocal versus a more homogenized, replicated format across the country?
Well, it's 2 different answers. There are great national ownership groups. Hubbard owns Q102 in Cincinnati, which, is one of my favorite top 40 stations in the country. They have had to deal with some of the same realities in terms of, staff cuts, but mostly you listen to a station like Q102 and on the air, they have a 3-person afternoon show, and on the air it's business as usual. And, there are small market owners who haven't been local since satellite radio came along 45 years ago. And at the same time, there are also small market owners who haven't gotten the memo. and somehow manage to be completely local. I mean, usually it's because people are working multiple jobs.
You can't really blame some of the big companies that own lots of radio stations because we're all capitalists. Let's face it, and we live in a capitalist society, and their job is to maximize the value of their properties. And they have a fiduciary responsibility to make all of their stations successful. So you can understand that from that point of view. But from people that love broadcasting,
it's beyond that. It's it's making do, with what they've got at this point. The decision to leverage radio, was made not by the people who have to do the cleanup now. It was made 15, 20 years ago in a lot of cases, and people are doing the best they can with what they've got.
Sure. I want to shift gears here just a little bit before we answer some of the questions coming in. There was a thing not too long ago, back in the 90s, I think, when I was making decisions about a radio station I worked at, that the inventory evaluation of the music that was available at that time really swings the format. You may be top 40, but you're at the beck and call of what music is popular at the time. How do you track that? I mean, how is that ship sailing at sea right now in the today's world? Because I just don't know. I mean, you would know, maybe Alex would know.
In top 40, there was a lot of excitement this spring. There was the artist Chapel Roan. There was Sabrina Carpenter. There were some left field hits like a bar song by Shabuzi, which is a country hip hop song. And, for a minute, there was a lot of excitement in top 40 for the first time in a decade. Country still feels pretty good about the available music it has right now. But record labels, are having their own issues. They have fewer people promoting records to radio. They are releasing fewer records to radio. And there are fewer people like Joel, who would who did what I call music enterprise and, went out and found records that weren't necessarily even being promoted.
Yeah, it's interesting because certainly music is changing over the years, and even the formats are a little weird. It's like the term hot AC. That's pretty broad term. I'm not sure that necessarily describes a real hot AC station. Top 40, I understand. Classic hits, that's also a very broad topic. I mean, what is a classic hit station in today's world?
In the big cities, it's typically 77 to 99, sometimes later. Maybe they go back to The Joker by Steve Miller, in 73. Some come up to Lady Gaga now.
Wow. So Lady Gaga is an oldie or a classic hit?
Some places. I saw an online discussion today about playing the Backstreet Boys, but the Backstreet Boys are 25 years old. The Backstreet Boys are as old as doo-wop was when the oldies stations of the 70s played doo-wop.
Yeah, and by the way, when we talk about oldies today, it's the 80s. It's not the 60s and the 70s. Maybe they'll leak in there a little bit. But I'm trying to identify where I am.
Most places, lots of places have stations, where you can hear the 60s and 70s. It sort of popped up. Station like The Drive in Tucson, for instance, still plays, has found a niche on AM and on a low power FM. playing Thunder Island.
But I guess the
And
issue
Alex
is
looks confused. Have you heard of Thunder Island, Alex?
I have not, no.
anyhow, I'm trying to do it without getting a
He's the
strike.
guy who went on to do the music for The Office.
Okay.
Yeah. Guy named
Which
Jay
office? The
Ferguson.
UK one or the US one?
The American one.
Okay, I haven't seen the American one.
There you go. Good test there, for sure. So music is very confusing to me as a 70-year-old. I'm sure they're not targeting radio formats to people my age. Why would they? Where is the sweet spot for broadcasting nowadays, Sean?
Even top 40, the average age is 35 now. I know Joel mentioned this. And those are the people who grew up with top 40 and who still want it, and who still listen to FM radio in any sustained way.
Sure. And you also consult some stations. Are you able to tell us what types of format they are?
Mostly classic hits,
Okay.
but I've worked with everything. I've worked with top 40. I've worked with country. I've worked with classic hip hop.
Wow. There you go. What is classic hip hop?
Everything is interconnected. There's a lot of connection between country and hip hop. When the classic, when a classic hip hop station comes on the air now, sometimes the country goes down.
Interesting. What do you think George Strait would have to say about that?
Well, I mean, George is at this point 3 or 4 different sets of country core artists away. Except in Texas, in Houston, you still hear him on the radio.
Are they sampling those songs to bring him into hip hop? I have no idea. I'm asking. Are they sampling the older stuff and bringing them in? Because I know sometimes the samples go unattributed. They just like, wow, that's a cool sample. Where did I get that bass line from, or whatever?
It's the other way around. The biggest country hit of the year samples a rap record.
That's cool. Alex, what do you think of this conversation? This should be jogging your creative juices a little bit. Is there some hope?
I don't know. Well, first of all, like for me, I think I'm a bit of an oddball for someone my age because, a lot of my friends don't buy physical media. They listen to streaming music, and I'm kind of an old school guy. Like I like using streaming music services to discover new artists because I like the recommendation engine. But for me, I stopped listening to the radio. I stopped listening to, I still listen to the radio, talk radio in traffic when I'm driving to work. But for music, I've just I stopped doing that a long time ago. So I buy vinyl. I'm analog. I'm not really listening to a lot of audio on streaming services or curated playlists anywhere. I like listening to my own records. I'm kind of stuck in my way, so I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. But I do, just thinking back to my days in high school. So I remember in Canada when it was still a thing. Much Music. You guys in the United States had MTV.
Yeah.
We had Much Music here in Canada, which was massively successful. Now, at the 90s, in the mid 90s, where Much Music was at its peak, I just remember as a heavy metal rock guitar player, when they would do on Friday night, late at night, I think at 10 o'clock at night, they would do what they called loud, where for 1 hour they would play all heavy metal music. And for me, I felt like I didn't know who was responsible for that, but I always felt like it was one person speaking to me like, oh, they get me. They're playing some stuff that I really, really like. That's not the common pop stuff that everybody wants to. So I love that kind of stuff. So, and I think you guys didn't really go into it a whole lot, but I still think there's a place for curated playlists, curated music. And I still appreciate the art of a DJ that has incredible knowledge of music history that can really tell me things that I don't know about that album, or talk to me about artists that I've never heard of, because I will go out and find those artists. I will go buy their records. I will go to their concerts. I still think there's value in that, and that's a bit of a lost art, because I feel like there's a whole new generation of people that are going into radio that are just
Alex,
not that interesting.
hold that thought. Just as an experiment, a thought experiment, we do a thing called Ruthless Reviews. And I just came up with what I would play in a typical hour if I got to play what I wanted to hear. And I'm interested in Sean and your opinion on this, Alex. But here's my playlist, maybe 12 songs in an hour. And it runs the gamut, demographically and probably year wise. But Sean, what do you think of that? Is that a total a train wreck as a format goes, or there's some interesting things in there that would grab your attention? Or you'd have to ask me, why the hell did you do that, Mitch? Can you see that? Okay.
We both have BB Mac and LTD in common.
Okay.
But here's the thing about classic hits. You start with the records everybody knows, even if they didn't grow up with them. Summer of '69 is playing for kids of the 90s and zeros now. So on this playlist, everybody wants to rule the world. You still hear it. Start Me Up, you still hear a little. And then, you have the music of 3 different high school classes there. And the answer is, I'd listen. My mixtape sounds a little different than everybody else's mixtape. There are people doing a 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s format, and everyone is different. So the answer is, I like the tempo. I'd listen. If I was going to choose something from late 90s, early zeros, I'd probably choose something a little punchier than BB Mac.
Okay.
Which brings us back to hearing the Backstreet Boys and, Backstreet's Back being an oldie.
And, the other thing is that some of the choices are there because I love to talk them up. I mean, when you play Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones,
right,
that is such a incredible intro to talk over. As a DJ, that just means that I really like that, so I got to play it. But how do you feel? How do you feel about Love Roller Coaster by the Red Hot Chili Peppers? There's one out of left field. Do you know what song I'm referring to?
I do, and Love Roller Coaster. Red Hot Chili Peppers are strangely polarizing. They're either Alexander's favorite or least favorite band.
And I did it because I loved it with not Ren and Stimpy, the 2 giggling guys. Alex, help me out here. I'm losing
Beavis and
it.
Butthead.
Yeah, Beavis and Butthead from their movie.
I like some Chili. I can't. I gotta be honest. I'm not. Nothing against the Chili Peppers. Not the biggest fan of their music. I like some of their older stuff, but I find that I find with them that a lot of the stuff they've been making for the last decade or so, it kind of sounds. It has the same tempo. They use a lot of the same chords, and it becomes kind of homogenous to me. Maybe I'm crazy. I don't know.
Love Roller Coaster by the Chili Peppers ought to be a record you hear now, because it's the kind of record that classic hit stations like. It's, a 90s version of a 70s record. It's perfect for them. They can play a 70s song and not go back too far.
And I put What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, which, first of all, I think it's a great song. But I watched this show called How the Music Changed in 1971 as a series. I forget which service it's on. And it was like the first protest song from a R&B artist, Marvin Gaye, protesting the world at the time from the 60s. And I thought, well, that really deserves to be, given some, the opportunity to be heard or seen or whatever. But that's my crazy, whacked out playlist, just so. And you were very kind to me, Sean, as I'm sure that any program director would say. You played this in an hour? Are you crazy? Because I might have alienated a lot of people. But I have
there are radio stations that go 70s through 90s or early zeros. There are radio stations that go 50s and 60s through, through relatively recent. The way you usually make it work, speaking not as a music lover, which I am, not as somebody who I would choose that radio station, but I would choose it specifically because I don't get to hear Back in Love Again on most radio stations.
LTD,
most places, right. If you are going to play 60s through today, you play wedding reception records because everybody knows them. You play
the first rule of music director is that play music that people are familiar with. And
you play your 60s record is Brown Eyed Girl or Respect, because those Morrison are the two everybody knows.
Sure.
Or
also to be interesting to do a format, because I personally have it in my library. Like there's a version of Rocket Man. It was done in like 2003. It was remixed for Elton John, sort of a dubstep, and it ended up being a recurring song played on the TV series Californication with David Duchovny. And it just struck me. I was like, well, I know the song, but I really like this interpretation of it. Doing songs that are familiar but remixed for today.
Rocket Man, even though it sounds nothing like any of the songs around it, is one of the songs that classic hit stations still play from that era. Along with Tiny Dancer, and Tiny Dancer is because it was an Almost Famous.
Yeah, there was a time where certain artists like Elton John were crossing over to the rock and roll side of things. Even Stevie Wonder, Songs in the Key of Life and Intervisions. He was an acceptable.
They weren't even crossing over; they were in the center.
They were there.
Rock radio changed. Not yet. In 1971, Elton John and James Taylor and Joni Mitchell and Bread were of a piece to people. They were all singer-songwriters. And, we didn't know that Elton would still be considered rock and roll all these years later, and Bread wouldn't. Because, the same 16-year-old owned all 4 albums. Wow. And owned Lobo.
I just have to tell you that I'm so amazed at the breadth of your information and knowledge of the music that gets played on radio. I think you're a great consultant to have out there, because you can redefine what today should appreciate, but you can also harken back to the early days of WFIL and WCFL and all those great radio stations and personalities and sounds. Maybe there'll be a time and a place for them to come back and revisit. But I like the way you think, Sean. I like the cut of your jib as far as your music choices go.
No, I appreciate that. And by the way, Alexander, I've done a lot of work in Canadian radio.
It shows.
We can have the Big Sugar discussion.
That's a great rock band. I love that.
I've been reeling off records that that Alexander has no reason to have ever heard of, and so.
What about Rush?
Now,
where's
Rush these days?
Just
for a change of pace, I'm gonna, we're gonna have the Sam Roberts, Trues, Biff Naked discussion.
I think you have a new best friend
that we
there.
can have our secret handshake moment also.
There you go.
Grand Band 3000.
It's great. Well, Sean, thank you so very much for coming on and talking about the old days, which just warms the cockles of my heart, especially when you talk about FIL and the early days of music. But seeing how a lot of that stuff has evolved into today, my advice is take advantage of all these great shows that are showing up on on Netflix, where they're redefining how music got here. Stories about the Funk Brothers, stories about the original Wrecking Crew that probably not wrote, but performed most of the hits in the '60s. The way all that played out, there's a lot of history here that got us to where we are musically. And I think we live in a great time to be able to expose lots of different kinds of music. What's happening that's the most encouraging thing before we go musically that's got you excited?
It's having, I'd like to hear some more up-tempo hip hop on the radio again. I'd like to hear a little more of a mix, but I was certainly excited about some of the pop music that came along. We already have our first hit of 2025. It's by SZA. It's called BMF. It's to the tune of The Girl from Ipanema. That's the
I
sample.
love that.
And if you pay any attention to current music, my prediction is you'll hear that in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
That's great. Alex, you have a question that you want to ask just before we wrap things up. I'll give you a chance to jump in there with it. You have it in Makana.
Yeah. My question was, what do you think of the current state of the podcast industry? And we can save it for another time because we're running out of time. But just quickly, what do you think of major companies reducing their ad spends or pulling out of podcasts? As this is an issue that I hear a lot of podcasters are having. Is what the major issue is that the technology that powers podcasts doesn't collect the kind of data that these companies want. So they can't gauge their return on investment very well. There's no psychographics. There's no demographics. All we get is a IP address and a location. We don't know anything about these people.
My former Edison colleague, Tom Webster, can speak chapter and verse on this. I will say, one, radio has, it's ironic to hear that because radio salespeople have been hearing for the last 15 years, that we don't have the ability to target or personalize like podcasts. And the truth is, that a lot of what you do pay for in digital advertising is mystery meat. Radio used to be considered successful if it delivered 7 people to the car dealership, but they all bought a car.
Got it. That makes sense.
So, the answer, radio would like to have the kind of, the radio would like to have the kind of benign neglect from advertisers that, that podcasting is starting to worry about. And it just shows how, fickle people are. And, of course, people don't necessarily have the budgets they have to, so they're giving one complaint to radio and one complaint to podcasters and perhaps playing them off against each other.
Right.
It's a good one.
Well, I think one of the interesting things is that the biggest difference for me as somebody that I pay a lot more attention to ads that are read by the host because we have an established relationship and I tend to trust that person. So when I hear ads on the radio, I kind of tune out. But that ad that's read by, say, a Howard Stern, I'm far more likely to pay attention to what they're saying.
Well, and as you lose people like Andre, you're losing the people who can do the live reads. You're losing the people who can get 7 people or 70 people to the car dealership.
Thanks very much, Sean. We greatly appreciate your insights. We know you have a heart out here, so you can get on with your family, and lots of great insights. And just tell everybody they can listen to this podcast after the fact when it goes audio only, or just check it out on YouTube at any time. We're going to cut you loose so you can go on and do your things. In the meantime, I just want to appreciate that you're a new best friend when it comes to talking about the encouraging things about music and radio in general. So thank you, Sean.
Yeah,
Thanks,
gentlemen,
Sean.
it's been a pleasure.
Thank
I
you.
am Ross on Radio everywhere. You can look for me on social. Most of those places have a sign-up link if you would like to see the newsletter. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Take care of yourself. Be good. And
Take care,
Alex,
everyone.
how do people get in touch with us if they want to ask questions in the future? We can talk about next week's guest in just a moment.
Absolutely. I'll just remind people that on Sunday, starting in usually early on Sunday morning, you can ask questions in our Q&A system. And you can do that by going to ask.thelastangry.dj.com. That's ask.thelastangry.dj.com. And if you'd like to be part of our community, you can go to Discord. I will pop up a QR code that will be hovering over my left shoulder right there in a second. And if you scan that code, you can get into Discord and continue the conversation after the show is over. We would appreciate it. This show is also available as an audio podcast, available on all platforms, Apple Podcasts, Google, TuneIn, Stitcher. You can ask your Amazon Alexa device to play our podcast, and
Alexa?
it will play as well. And we're available on YouTube and all social media platforms at The Last Angry DJ. Pretty much everywhere.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. And a great show, but we always do our very best. And Sean came in because somebody requested that he would be an excellent interviewer, guest, etc., and pundit for the industry. Should have more folks like him. And if you want to do that, do what Alex just said. Let us know. And you can email us anytime, and you can do the Makana bit the day of the show if you want to do that. Mark, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to get a lot of your questions in, but we did the best we could. It was as good as we could get as far as that goes. Next week, we're going to have on show number 46, Sanders Hickey, who owns a bunch of small radio stations, Mark. This would be very interesting for you to. And he's also made the transition to streaming. Knows a lot of people in the industry. We're going to talk a lot about how to stream your radio station if you have an idea for one, and how he's taken a traditional terrestrial broadcast and made it relevant in today's work. That's for next week's show. In the meantime, we want to thank all of you for being here today. All of my co-hosts here, Mark Giuliani, Laura Thompson, and Alexander Knight, our production producer and question asker and representative from the Great White North. For those of you who are going to get some snow tonight and tomorrow, my heart goes out to you. I love a good snowstorm, so I'm all socked in and ready to go here on the East Coast. So good luck to you all. Take care, folks. Be good.